It just vacuumed out the pieces.
Yep.
And I'm not sure there was a 429.
I'm doing great.
No, I took them off and poured straight in the floor. We talked to Dan because every now and then it gets what she said. She said it's getting oils from the eye.
Good morning. It's going good.
All alive.
Yeah. Well, from what I've been told, I had vertigo. Yeah. Probably threw up and everything. And I thought I had the flu. Oh. Wednesday morning I woke up and like I could hardly stand. The room was like skinny. And so and then I threw up and I was like, oh, it must be the flu. But then like later that afternoon, I was like, I don't know what that was. So yeah, it's kind of scary. Do that once in my life. Yeah. And becoming once.
I see you won one of the drawings.
Did.
That's awesome. What'd you get?
The
out around the corner.
All right, good morning, church. We're going to get started with our Bible class this morning. We'll be finishing up chapter 21 and then be spending most of our time in chapter 22. But if you remember last week, going through chapter 21, not only did we have the birth of Isaac, but then also the drama of the birth of Isaac, and what do we do now with Ishmael? Seemingly the kids weren't getting along, or at least Ishmael was not treating Abraham's heir in the right way, and Sarah took offense to that, and so Abraham's kind of in this between a rock and a hard place of Ishmael is also my son, even though he's not he's not the promise isn't going to come through him, and so but God tells him, yep, put him away. And we talked about how as seemingly cruel or insensitive this might feel like, it was actually God has a reason and a purpose for everything, and we get kind of the explanation for this, or at least God using this example to teach a greater teaching over in I believe it's Galatians chapter 4, talking about separating the flesh from the spirit and stuff like that. We got all the way up to verse 15, so we're going to get the rest of the story now. Verse 15 through 18, it says, so Abraham, taking them out, he took bread and gave them a skin of water, and gave it to Hagar and put it on her shoulder. And then verse 15, it says, when the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, let me not look on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened his eyes, then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. All right, as Hagar and Ishmael traveled away from Abraham, their supplies eventually ran out, which that's going to happen. Their water was used up, and Hagar left Ishmael under the shade of one of the shrubs, expecting their death to come upon them in the wilderness. I'm guessing, we get the description here pretty well of Hagar thinking death would be swift without any supplies or water in the wilderness, and so she goes away. She doesn't want to be looking at her son while he dies, but God still shows favor to Ishmael because he was a descendant of Abraham. And now the descendants of Ishmael is going to be a whole
another story, but though Ishmael was not the son to receive the covenant promise, it didn't mean that God was against him. He just wasn't the son of promise. And I think this, in chapter 21, knowing what's going to happen in chapter 22, I think there's a part to be, I think they're connected in some way, and we'll cover that when we actually get into chapter 22. But he was with Ishmael and promised a great future for him and his descendants. But just like the descendants that would come through Abraham and Isaac, there was a determining factor that needed to be considered with all of that as well. So are you going to be obedient to God? And so, and like I said, even though this seems kind of just, cruel and really difficult to understand, God had a purpose and a plan through all of it. Verses 22 through 24, it says, at that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my descendants, or with my posterity. But as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me and with the land where you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I swear. We have this agreement here, this covenant, and like I said before, with we saw this transfer of sheep and oxen. Between them, those animals might have also served as the way that they made the covenant or cut the covenant here between Abraham and Abimelech. And where are we? Oh, we need to keep reading. Verse 25 and following, it says, Then when Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and 2 men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart, and Abimelech said to Abraham, What is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart? And he said, These 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore that place is called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. We see here this place that, if you know your Bible, Beersheba gets mentioned a lot in the Old Testament, and here we get the beginnings of it. Beersheba was a descriptive name. It means either watering place or well of underground water. And Beersheba would become a notable place in Israel's continuing history. Abraham's grandson Jacob would stop in Beersheba as he left the Promised Land. When Israel took possession of the Promised Land, Beersheba became the territory of the tribe of Simon and Judah. Samuel's sons were judges in Beersheba. King Saul fortified Beersheba in his battles against the Amalekites. The prophet Elijah found refuge at Beersheba when Jezebel ordered him killed. The prophet Amos mentioned Beersheba in regard to idolatry, And the phrase that we see in the Old Testament from time to time, from Dan to Beersheba, would later become the proverbial phrase describing the entire land of Israel, from north, Dan, to south, Beersheba. After a successful treaty here, so they figured out the water rights here of this well, Abraham did something that looked forward to coming decades and generations. He planted a tamarisk tree. And a tamarisk tree takes a long time to grow, especially if you think about where they are at in kind of a desolate place. Obviously, we just saw, running out of water for Hagar and Ishmael was a serious thing. And so a well was that was your lifeline in the wilderness. He plants a tamarisk tree, and Abraham knew that God had promised the land to him and his descendants forever. That this was going to be, a sign of not only this covenant, but the sign of their land as they came into possession of it. And then it says that Abraham called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. Even through this time of conflict and turmoil, right, of having to send away one of his children, and conflict among Abraham's neighbors, Abraham kept a real and true walk with God. Conflict did not drive him away, but allowed him to push himself closer to the Lord. And in chapter 22, we see the culmination of so much of the things that we have been discussing up to this point in Abraham's life, of him being a man of God, a man of faith. We see it come to fruition. Before we get into chapter 22, though, just thinking about our lives. We talked about Abraham's turmoil and trials that he's gone through. Why does God provide us with tests and trials today?
What do you think? Rob?
I was going to say, to strengthen our faith, make us wiser and stronger.
Make us wiser and stronger. Yeah.
To bring us closer to him, because sometimes we think we're pretty good by ourselves, taking care of ourselves, and we don't.
Yeah.
When we have troubles, we need him.
Sometimes we need a wake-up call, right? Of thinking that we are able to sustain ourselves. We get a little too big for our britches. Bill?
According to James chapter 1, it says the testing of your faith produces perseverance.
Yeah.
And if everything's going perfectly, we tend to forget God.
That's true.
And so if there's trials there, then we look to him during those times.
Absolutely. Jerry?
I was thinking, he left out the first part of that. It says count it all joy. When you fall in various tribulations, but we don't count joy when we're there. Do we?
We should. I mean, having a little bit of perspective. Go ahead, Scott.
I'm just going to say, a lot of times the trials that we have is because we aren't quite aligned with God. So it's kind of the consequences of things that we set up ourselves. So
Very true.
because it causes trials, and that gives us the opportunity to turn back to God and kind of redirect, proves our faith, can prove our faith, and it can cause perseverance. Just depends on how we respond to those trials and consequences of our actions as we go through it. It's going to also kind of drive you away from God. Why am I going through this? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
There's going to be in chapter 22. If you have a subheading in your Bible, you already know what's about to happen. But Abraham is put into a test or a trial that I would think for anyone, but especially for parents, is unthinkable. Being asked to do what Abraham is about to be asked is, I don't even know how to describe what his experience, what his feelings or his emotional state would have been when God told him what he's about to tell him. So let's read it. Verses 1 and 2. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountains of which I shall tell you. It says God tested Abraham. And this was not so much a test to produce faith, I believe, as much as it was a test to reveal his faith. God built Abraham slowly, as we've been noting, right? He's building this man up slowly, piece by piece, year by year, trial by trial, into a great man of faith. And this test would reveal some of the faith that God had built into Abraham. Abraham responds to God, Here I am. I'm here. Abraham's quick answer to the call is a wonderful example of how men and women of faith should respond to God. God needs something. Here I am. He's placed something on our hearts. Here I am. He's asked us to do something. Here I am. When Abraham said, Here I am, it meant that he was ready to be taught, ready to obey, ready to surrender, and he was ready to be examined by God. And again, what a great example for us in our lives and our faith. Since Ishmael was put away from Abraham's family in the previous chapter, we just talked about that, as far as God's covenant was concerned, Abraham only had one son. And so when he says, Take your son, your only son, and he says, whom you love, this is the first mention that I believe in the Bible of the word love. It's in the context of a love between father and son, connected to the idea of a sacrificial offering of that son. He says, offer him there as a burnt offering. God told Abraham to offer his son as a burnt offering, and this was not an offering that was to be burned alive, but to be taken first by sacrifice and then the body completely burnt before the Lord. Priests of the Canaanite gods said their gods demanded human sacrifice, and we see that, and we will see that in our time here in Genesis, and moving forward into the Old Testament. We hear about human sacrifice. The people sacrificed their children to the pagan god Molech. And so this is, Canaanite gods or pagan gods. This was something that was common for them. And the people of Canaan found nothing especially strange about human sacrifice. But Abraham had believed that his God was different. Let me ask you this. Imagine being in Abraham's shoes here. and God told you to go sacrifice one of your children, how would you react if God told you to do this?
Depends on the day.
And on the day? Deliverance.
Oh, thank you. You're seeing things the same way.
Enough with this child. Parenting humor.
Be sick sometimes, you know.
Monica,
I would need more information. I would like to know
Ooh.
why.
clarify.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
can you please, what? What are
Huh?
you talking about? Yeah, so instead of just like grabbing my stuff and walking out the door, I think I would argue it a little bit.
Sure. That like connection's not clear today. I thought you said this.
Yeah, of like, hey, tell me more about what's going on here.
Monica's way more faithful than I am. I can just be no and grab my son and ran as fast as I could.
Hmm.
I mean, and granted, I'm running from God, so I probably wouldn't have gotten very far.
Sure. Just say no. Yeah.
There would be some denial, like, no, surely he doesn't actually want me to do this.
No way. No way. Yeah, Phil.
What I'm really surprised at Abraham was he didn't say, wait a minute, God, this is the son you gave me from promise. And so, you know, all of us would have said, hey, you know, this is the son you gave me. Why would I do that? That's totally against what you believe or stand up for.
Yeah.
This is not, it's not mathing right.
That's what Jerry.
That effort to disqualify myself, because I only have one son, and I wouldn't give it up, pretty soon. But this is the only place in the Bible where God was interacting with Abraham. That it's mentioned that this was a test.
Yeah.
And, but I don't think Abraham knew that.
No.
We know that now.
Yeah.
So what he did was more remarkable than we can possibly think.
Yeah.
It wasn't like before God spoke, that sound that comes over the radio waves, right? This is just a test. This has been a test of the emergency preparedness system. Thank you. No, I don't. We don't get any indication here that Abraham knows that this is a test. A writer by the name of Jack Smith wrote for the LA Times, and he wrote about this biblical incident. This was long ago. And he said that he would have told God to mind his own business. Because that's what the world always says to God. Mind your own business. In 1993, a man by the name of Andrew Cate was sentenced to 60 years in prison after being convicted of fatally shooting his 2-year-old daughter when then walking naked through the neighborhood carrying her body. Cate claimed he was acting out the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac, and God would do a miracle to win his brother to Christianity. Cate believed God would miraculously stop him at the last moment before killing his daughter. The man was obviously deranged. What Abraham did was something completely unique in God's redemptive story, given for a specific purpose, once for all fulfilled. There's no way God would ever direct someone to do this same thing today. As will be shortly demonstrated, a significant point in this story is the demonstration that God did not, in fact, want this kind of sacrifice.
Now,
when it comes to sacrificing our children, I think it's just like, it's unthinkable. It's unfathomable, right? It's just like, I think many of our responses would simply just be no. I cannot and I will not do that. But what if God asks you to sacrifice something else? Whether it be a job or the PlayStation or a hobby or a relationship. Sadly, even with these lesser things, we tend to respond the same way, don't we? God, mind your own business. As if following God isn't supposed to cost us something. Rob?
I was going to say, I don't know if Abraham had in the back of his mind that even if I did do this, God could bring him back to life. I don't know if it's kind of a foreshadowing of God giving up his son on the cross.
This test was
Difficult, and yet another aspect, because it seemed to contradict the previous promise that God had made, that through Isaac shall your seed be called. It seemed strange and contradictory to kill the son who was promised to carry on the covenant when it had not been fulfilled in him. It seemed as if God commanded Abraham to kill the very promise that God had made to him. Abraham had to learn the difference between trusting the promise and trusting the promiser. We can put God's promise before God himself and feel that it's our responsibility to bring about the promise, even if we have to disobey God to do it. Trusting the promiser no matter what, and the promise will take care of itself.
In regards to Rod's comment about Abraham believing that God would raise him, or could possibly raise him from the dead, I'm not recalling a previous example in Scripture of such a thing happening. My question is, did Abraham have a concept of God resurrecting the dead?
maybe. Maybe not.
Nothing's coming to mind, right? Just thinking about it for 15 seconds.
Yeah. I mean, he would have a concept of the miraculous, obviously. I mean, that's the whole reason why he's got Isaac in the first place.
That's true.
Is the miraculous, and so maybe it's not necessarily I've seen this before, right? But if God is God over the womb, God over life, then surely on either end, he can make things happen. Scott, did you ever hear anything?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, your last sentence that you read there, and then a lot of times when we're tested, we try to fulfill things ourselves. And that was the whole thing with Ishmael, was him putting, okay, you said I'm going to be promised the seed and stuff.
Yeah.
And so Ishmael was that when, you're not taking care of it right so far, God, I'll go ahead and do that. Well, here, I think it's just to cement that faith that he had, because I have Isaac. That's the one that, you told me it was going to happen. I didn't believe you, so I kind of tried to take care of it myself. Now it's happening and everything's great. But just to further, cement that truth or the power of God or everything else, this is, the course that's taken, and, he's being tested. And I think at this point, Abraham, with everything else that's happened, just seems like it's like, okay, God, I mean, you promised this. I don't know how you're going to do it. I don't know, what's going to happen, but yes, I am, now I believe you. I haven't, I've tried to take care of it myself, but he's just fully, gone to trust that what God is saying he's going to do is going to happen, and no matter what God asks him.
Well, I think,
You think about, where Abraham's at, where Sarah's at with this, of how long do you think that they've been praying for God to give them a son? And then God gives it to them. And then this happens with us too. When we pray for something and God gives us that thing that we've asked for, and then does that somehow supplant our faith and trust in God? Of like, well, He's given me this thing, and so now, no matter what, this is what I got to do. Whereas God gives and God takes, and the question is whether He gives or takes, does our faith remain solid in Him no matter what?
Eric, what are you going to say?
Were you gonna go to Hebrews 11?
I was.
Maybe, should I wait for my comments?
Wait until we get to verses 4 through 8.
But anyway, he, Isaac came with kind of more miraculous things than our children do. I think, I'm very impressed with Abraham's response here, but they were beyond childbearing years. Like, I think Abraham really did believe Isaac was like God. And I think you see this by, he's like, whatever you want with Isaac, I'll do, because it was so miraculous already.
Yeah.
Versus having a child for 20.
Yeah. No doubt.
You see this, and I think this is why the youngest child gets the persona of being the golden child. Is because, Alicia and I, Angelina being our first, she was also our guinea pig, and we told her that, of like, hey, we're going to make a lot of mistakes with you, so sorry beforehand. Then, like, when you get older, it's kind of like, whatever, Sophia, whatever, you're good. You can figure it out. I don't, but that idea of Isaac being like, yeah, God, you brought this, and so, he's yours. Interesting thought. Let's read verse 3.
Let's not read verse 3. Phil.
Well, I believe that Abraham believed that God would raise him up, according to verse 5. Because it says...
We're not there yet. Were you going to just read verse 5?
Yeah.
Give me a second. Here.
According to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19, it said that Abraham concluded that God could raise him up. Sometimes when we read that, we wonder if he concluded that before or after the event.
Let's read verse 3.
It says, so Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God told him. There is no sign of hesitation here on Abraham's part. He rose early in the morning to do this. I would imagine, being a parent, because he didn't get any sleep that night. Because it's like, well, I'm up anyways. Let's go. Off we go. Abraham's obedience showed that he trusted God, even when he did not understand. Sometimes we say, I'm not going to obey or believe until I understand it all. But that is not. That is to put myself on equal standing with God. Abraham's obedience showed that he did not debate or seek counsel from others. He knew what to do and refused to use stalling tactics. Abraham's obedience showed that he trusted God even when he did not feel like it. There is not a line in this text about how Abraham felt. Not because he didn't feel, but because he walked by faith, not by feelings. God trained Abraham over many decades, bringing him to this place of great trust. And in the last chapter, God asked Abraham to give up Ishmael in a less severe way. And God used that and everything else to train up Abraham to build great faith in him. We see this. I mean, you just look back through the life of Abraham. Everything has been leading up to this moment of constantly God training him up and bringing this great faith about him. One thing I would ask us to consider as we look back through our lives, what's God training you up for? What lessons has he tried to give you? Hopefully, when God was teaching those lessons, you didn't decide to skip school that day. Or where is God wanting you to trust him in that is scary or inconceivable, like where Abraham is at here?
Rob? I was going to say, it's interesting that Abraham would, debate God about Sodom and Gomorrah. He wouldn't debate about his own son.
And I think that shows progress.
Verses 4 through 8. On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offerings and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took his hand in his hand the fire and the knife, so that they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they went both of them together. Phil, what do you think about verse 5?
No, you cut me off. Well, he said, he told the servant, "You stay here.
Yeah.
I and my son will go there and worship, and we will return."
Yes. I know you saw that. I wanted to give you your moment. That's right. That's what Abraham said. Right? It said, "Hey, you guys stay here, we're gonna go over there, and then we will both come back together." And so whether it was, there's a whole bunch of space in there, right? Of, I'm gonna do this and God's gonna raise him from the dead. Or what he told Isaac, right?
God's going to provide a lamb for us to kill, or he's going to, stop this whole thing, or, who knows? But this is what he said, is that, hey, we're going there and we're both coming back. Interesting thing. I don't know if you guys caught this, but with all of the symbolism and a father sacrificing his son, I think it's only natural for us, being on this side of the cross, to start connecting dots here. And that this section here that I just read, verse 4, started on the third day. Do you find that at all just so interesting that is recorded here? Of all the things, it took them 3 days to get there. But he doesn't just say it like that. It's like, it took 3 days to travel. It says on the third day. Very interesting. And then it says the region of Moriah is associated with Mount Moriah, which is modern-day Jerusalem. In 2 Chronicles 3, verse 1, 2 Chronicles 3, verse 1, it says, "Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to David his father at the place that David had appointed on the threshing floor of Ornan, the Jebusite." This spot here shows up by different names throughout the history of the world, and notably, that's another dot to connect this whole thing between Abraham and Isaac and God and Jesus. In Hebrews 11, verses 17 through 19, it says, "By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Abraham's faith was in understanding that should he kill Isaac, God would raise him from the dead, because God had promised Isaac would carry on the line of blessing of the covenant. Abraham knew anything was possible, but it was impossible that God would break his promise. And he knew God was not a liar. It says the two of them went together. That's how this section ends here. And both of them went together. That literally means that two of them went in agreement. And so if the picture is playing out for you, I think The Simpsons did a parody of this, where it's like you get that whole like, oh, you're gathering wood, and like, Dad, what are we doing here? And it's like, oh, you have a knife, and it's like, well, what is going on here? It's like, oh, just trust me. From the text, we get more of the idea that Isaac was told by Abraham what was going to happen. Isaac did this knowingly and willingly, and so it's, like Abraham isn't like tricking his son here, and so I think this fear would have started to kind of mount for both of them. Verse 9 says, when they, what, Troy?
If that's true that Isaac was willing, it's another parallel to Christ.
We're getting there. And I agree. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Verses 10 through 14, it says, then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. He said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for I now know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. And we see, like as have been mentioned here, so many parallels between this and the sacrifice of Jesus. The whole chapter is an image of that prophecy. It says Isaac was reckoned dead by Abraham, that God gave the command, and Isaac was made alive 3 days later. Both were loved by their father. Both offered themselves willingly. Both carried wood up the hill of their sacrifice. Both were sacrificed on the same hill, and both were delivered from death on the third day. Some scholars have even gone so far as to note that the ram that was caught in the thicket could have easily been the same type of briars and thorns that were used to make the crown of thorns that they placed on Jesus' head. There's if you've read the New Testament, you read this story and be like, oh, so like Jesus was a rerun. Got it. We've heard this story before, and I don't think there's any other way of getting around that fact that this is a prophetic retelling of the story. As we come to a close this morning, again, this whole thing, something to keep in mind is that the first few words of chapter 22 is that God was going to test Abraham. This was not a test to produce faith, it was a test to reveal faith. And so as we think about the tests and trials that we encounter in our lives, perhaps that's another way of considering that. Of these things that we encounter, maybe are not there to put our faith to the test, but to reveal to us what our faith actually is. Let's close in a prayer, and then we'll be dismissed. Dear Heavenly Father, God, thank you so much for this time we have to look into your word. God, we read chapters like this and are just in awe of your will and the way that you work through and in people's lives. God, help us to learn from this story, not only of obedience and sacrifice, God, but of just being able to trust you with our most valuable and prized possessions, to trust you with our entire lives, God, knowing that you have a plan, and that if we love you, then we will trust in your plan for our lives. God, please be with us now as we enter into this time of worship, that we might worship you the way that you would want, and that it would be a pleasing aroma before you. We love you. It's in your Son's name that I pray. Amen.